I've been asked to make a video about the importance of a resource like Khan Academy for a country like India. And before we talk about the Indian specific context, I want to talk a little bit about what exactly Khan Academy is, because different people have different perceptions of what it's about. So it did start off, and this story is now kind of commonplace. It did start off with me making a bunch of videos on YouTube, and the video library still is a good fraction of what students use. And it's been kind of crazy. It's on the order of 7 or 8 million unique students a month are now using the videos and the rest of the platform. But we have the videos, and then we also have the interactive exercises. So I don't know, maybe I'll draw a man running to show exercises, although they're not physical exercises. Well, I don't know how good of a drawing that is. But we have the exercises. And it's all on a platform where we're trying to capture as much data, we're trying to put game mechanics, we're trying to understand how we can motivate and engage people in more and more ways. So that's all in a platform. I'll call it data analytics and game mechanics. Well, maybe I'll separate them out. So there's the data part of it, and then there's the game part of it. And when people, sometimes when you use a word like game mechanics, some people say, oh, game mechanics, that's for video games. That's not for serious education. But it's important to realize that things like game mechanics are everywhere. It's just they're not typically called game mechanics. Any incentive mechanism really is a game mechanic. And frankly, the ones that are done in video games, they're much more sophisticated at incenting proper behavior. And you see that when you see kids that are otherwise disengaged in school, they're highly engaged on complex tasks, often in a video game. And to give an example of it, grades are game mechanics, credentials are game mechanics, even interviews are game mechanics. Anything that there's an incentive structure in place for students to do something, that is some form of a game mechanic. And we think that these things can all be optimized, especially when you start using data. Now, given that we're doing all of this stuff and we're trying to expand this as much as we can, so right now, in terms of breadth, Khan Academy is mainly, I would call it K for kindergarten, K through, sometimes you'll hear K through 12, but I'll say K through 14, which would mean K through 12 and maybe your first 2 years of college. That's where a lot of our content is, and it's primarily science, technology, math, and engineering. I'll say engineering and math, typically called STEM, engineering and math. But there is a little bit of other stuff in there. There is a good bit of economics and finance, and even there's some humanities, including art history that's not done by myself. So this is the breadth of things, but we're hoping to expand this more and more and really push the envelope of what can be done in terms of the content. So over the next several years, expect to see, one, these parts get richer, but also see content on grammar and vocabulary. And we really want to explore how you can do even open-ended things like writing, and you're even on the engineering side, things like computer science. So expect to see all of that from the Khan Academy. Now, that out of the way, let's think about the Indian specific context. And obviously there's India, and there's a lot of countries that are like India. And it's a modernizing country. It needs kind of a 21st century workforce, but it has severe problems, I would say, with inequality and access to a decent education. And so, especially when you think of India in the broadest sense, when you think of not just the urban, the upper class in the urban, you think of the whole population of India, there's a bunch of problems. The first one is obviously just resources. So access, you have resources. So that's step one. If right now you want to educate a student, you at least need the resources to maybe build a school. And let's put Khan Academy aside. Let's not talk about the physical realm. Let's think about the virtual realm. Let's put the virtual aside. Let's think about the physical problems right now. So you need the resources to build a school and hire teachers. Even if you have the resources, then you start facing the second problem. Of finding the talent. It might be easier at the primary levels, but if you want to teach kids in rural India something more advanced, trigonometry, calculus, physics, chemistry, the people who know that might have already left the village. They might not even be available there. So it's finding the talent. And I'm not saying that they're not there. There are definitely cases there are. But based on my understanding, it can be very difficult in many rural parts of not just India, in the world, to find the talent to be really, really strong teachers, especially at more advanced topics. And then even if you have the talent, if you have the talent or something or fairly good teachers, there's the issue of teacher absenteeism, where you don't have good good organizational ways to control what is happening in these facilities that you might have in places that are far away from cities and whatever else. So my understanding is things like teacher absenteeism. I don't know if I'm spelling it right. Absenteeism is a big problem in India. And then even if you're able to solve all of these three problems, then you have the problems of actually getting the students to show up. So then you have, I will just call that student attendance. Student attendance, because obviously in some of the less affluent parts of India, students have responsibilities to help their family. They might not have been in school for some time. There might not even be parent support in circumstances. They might say, hey, why do you have to go study algebra? You're just going to work on our family farm for the next generation. So there might even be resistance for students to attend. And even if you get all of these out of the way, then you still have the problem. Of you have really different levels, different skill levels, and they're not necessarily correlating with age. So in a traditional school, all the 10-year-olds are in 5th grade, all the 11-year-olds are in 6th grade, or I guess in India they would call it 6th class or 5th class, I believe. But now if you're in an environment, especially in a more rural environment, some students at 10 or 11 might be quite literate, might be kind of at their grade level for mathematics, while some might not have been at school or ever. And you might have 17 or 18-year-olds who have trouble with basic reading, basic arithmetic, not to speak of things like algebra. So you have different skill levels. Different skill levels. So we think the real opportunity with something like Khan Academy, a virtual resource, is if you don't have any of these, it provides a kind of a really good foundation, a really good basis for students. So obviously on the resource side, Khan Academy itself, to deliver Khan Academy to an incremental student, is free, assuming they have access to technology. Assuming they have access to technology. And that's a big assumption. That's a big assumption even in a place like the United States, much less a place like India. The good thing about technology is it's getting dramatically cheaper year by year. There's news of, there's that word of that tablet in India, a $30 tablet. You can imagine a $30 tablet, even if it's a tablet per student, if it lasts 3-4 years, now you're talking about under $10, if I'm talking about US dollars, under $10 a year per student. So it becomes something that's approaching quite affordable, and then you would have to think about how do you get access to bandwidth and things like that, but that also is getting dramatically cheaper. And especially, we don't see a reality where kids would have to be on their computer day and night. You could have one computer, one tablet shared by 4 or 5 kids, and then the per year cost per student becomes quite cheap. So this right here is a problem of adoption right now, especially in a place like India, but we think that this is going to, independent of us, is going to be solved over the next decade. Technology and bandwidth is going to become dramatically cheaper. And things like cell phones, they're getting more and more powerful. They have pretty good penetration in the developing world, and we think the cell phones of the future are going to be at least as powerful as the computers that we're using today. And then on the talent thing, what Khan Academy does is it can augment whatever talent is available locally. So now through the videos, through the exercises, the students will have access to a broader pool of what do you want to call them, lectures, exercises, and we also want to create, and I forgot to write this down, we also want to create a sense of community on the site. So they'll have access to other learners who are outside of their direct sphere, physical sphere. So I think this could be a really powerful thing. Absenteeism, once again, it's an issue in the physical realm, but in the virtual realm, if a student has access to a device of some kind, then you actually solve this, especially if they have some type of network connectivity, because we have the data, and we can essentially track in real time if the asset is being used, if the kid is using his tablet, how he or she is progressing, how they might be progressing relative to a peer group, and see what variables in their environment can be changed or optimized so that the student gets more engaged or has a better chance of success. So we think that a technology-based solution can do a lot for this problem. Student attendance, once again, if a student has to work during the day, help their family during the day or maybe part of the year, the beauty of virtual learning is that it is at the student's time. So it is on demand when the student needs it. So even if the student does have some responsibilities for the family, they now have access to it maybe at night. And I'll even add this, it's not just a student, it can change what's happening in the family, because even the adults in the family will now have access to build up their foundations without having to be embarrassed, without having to go to a primary school and admitting what they may or may not know. And then the kind of the biggest thing here is addressing the different skill set. And this isn't a problem that's unique to a place like India. This is universal. You go to even the most affluent parts of the world, you go into a classroom, every student is being moved together at the same pace, despite the fact that students are all at different levels. Different people take different amounts of time to learn something, and they tend to learn it in different ways. And so that's where I think the real power of on-demand, self-paced, mastery-based learning really hits it. So I think it's really especially powerful there. And then on top of all of this, we think that there's a kind of a meta-level international thing here, where a student in India can connect with students across borders. They can start to connect with students in Pakistan through Khan Academy. Maybe eventually, we don't have this functionality, they can be each other's tutors. They can communicate with kids in the US and Europe and China, and you start to have kind of a global connectedness. And it'll be a way for students also, we're hoping to, and this is something we're already working on, we're already doing translations into Hindi, Bengali, and even Tamil. We want to translate this into the major languages of the world so people can access it in their native tongue eventually. The videos are being done first. Eventually, all of this will be. But it also is an opportunity for students to get proficient in things that have high economic value, like becoming a little bit better in English so that you can enter into kind of a more global workforce. So anyway, hopefully I'm not boring you. This is a lot. This is longer than my standard video. But I actually think in a place like India, the potential for Khan Academy might even be larger than in the developed world.